Try not to spill the Chateau Margaux. You couldn't possibly afford a single drop. The insult, sharp and venomous, sliced through the elegant hum of Aurelia, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment. It came from the VIP table, where Julian Croft, a man whose tailored suit was as severe as his smirk, leaned back, observing the world he owned. To the gilded patrons of this hall, the young waitress was less than a ghost, a mere function, a shadow gliding through their universe of crystal and caviar, utterly unworthy of a second glance. Her name was Elara Kane, though no one had bothered to ask. She was simply the help. Her uniform, a stark black dress, was impeccably clean, but showed the faint creases of a long day. Dark, raven hair was pulled back in severe, no-nonsense ponytail. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a quiet, profound beauty that didn't plead for attention. Minutes later, when a crack of splintering oak announced the arrival of 3 armed men, and the entire restaurant dissolved into a symphony of panic, Elara stood alone, a solitary pillar calm in the storm. In less time than it takes to draw a breath, she neutralized all 3 assailants. Her movements were a blur of deadly precision, a brutal ballet that hinted at a past in the Navy SEALs, a history no one in that room could have ever conceived. From a corner table, the enigmatic billionaire Alexander Thorne watched, his fork frozen midair, his expression one of utter astonishment. A stunned silence fell over the room, their casual cruelty and snapped judgments now laid bare like a festering wound. Elara was 25, with a face that felt like a half-remembered dream, classic and unadorned. Not glamorous, not polished, but intensely real. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, seemed to possess an unnerving clarity, as if they could peel back the layers of pretense and see the raw truth of a person. She moved with an economy of motion, every step deliberate, her hands impossibly steady, even when laden with precarious tower of delicate wine glasses. Aurelia wasn't just a restaurant. It was a cathedral of wealth. Its chandeliers wept tears of crystal light, and the very air was perfumed with truffle oil and the intoxicating scent of entitlement. The clientele didn't merely dine, they performed. Their laughter was a little too loud, the clinking of their glasses a theatrical display of status. Elara was an anomaly here. Her scuffed flats, her lack of artifice, her profound silence, it all branded her as an outsider. They were oblivious of the fact that she had been raised in a world just as rarefied, the daughter of family whose name was etched onto half the city skyline. She had been taught the same lessons of poise and restraint, but had walked away from it all, choosing purpose over privilege. This was the price of her choice, paid in nightly installments of quiet contempt. She'd been at Aurelia for 7 months, willingly taking the late shifts where the tips were generous but the patrons were savage. Her colleagues tolerated her, mostly because she was an enigma who created no drama. She cleared tables with silent efficiency, absorbed her complaints with a stoic nod, and never, ever snapped back. It wasn't weakness. It was discipline. Elara had seen real conflict, been in places where a single misstep didn't just bruise an ego, it cost a life. She had learned to choose her battles, and these people, with their designer handbags and cutting remarks, were not a battle worth fighting. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different, charged and heavy, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The VIP table, Julian Croft's table, was particularly boisterous. Croft, a hedge fund titan in his mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and a platinum watch that flashed with every arrogant gesture, held court. Beside him sat his wife, Isabel, poured into a crimson dress, her smile as sharp and brilliant as a shard of glass. Across from them sat Chadwick Chad Sterling, a crypto millionaire with a tan that defied the New York winter, and his girlfriend Tiffany, a confection of blonde highlights and glittering diamonds. They were a pack of wolves, hungry to make someone feel insignificant, and Elara was their chosen prey. As Elara approached with a fresh bottle of wine, Julian held his glass up to the light, inspecting it with the intense scrutiny of a diamond merchant. "You've missed a spot," he declared, pointing to an invisible flaw. "I suppose they don't teach proper cleaning in whatever forgotten town you crawled out of." The table erupted in laughter. Isabel's a shrill, piercing note. Elara's hand, steady on the bottle's neck, didn't tremble. She placed it down with a soft, deliberate clink. "My apologies, sir. I will bring you a new glass, she said, her voice a low, even murmur. As she turned, Tiffany leaned into Chad, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. She has absolutely no class. I bet she's never even eaten in a place like this, unless it was to scrub the toilets. Elara's stride remained unbroken, but for a fraction of a second, her knuckles went white against the edge of her service tray. The manager, Martin, a man perpetually glistening with nervous sweat, was no better. He intercepted her by the kitchen doors, his grip on her elbow surprisingly strong. "Stay away from Mr. Thorne's table," he hissed. "The last thing he needs is you clumsily tripping over his feet." He jerked his head toward the corner where Alexander Thorne sat alone. Thorne was 35, with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His suit was a masterpiece of understated tailoring. It radiated an aura of quiet power that drew gazes without demanding them. He was engrossed in his phone, but Elara felt his eyes flick towards her for a brief, assessing moment. She nodded at Martin, her voice devoid of emotion. Understood. She didn't argue. She simply moved on. Just before the world shattered, there was a quiet, fleeting moment. Standing at the bar, refilling a water pitcher, Elara's hand instinctively went to a small, creased photograph she kept tucked in her apron. It showed a younger, weary-eyed Elara in combat fatigues, standing shoulder to shoulder with a unit of grim-faced soldiers in some dusty, sun-scorched courtyard. Leo, the bartender, noticed her distant stare. "Family?" he asked gently. Elara slipped the photo away, her face an unreadable mask. "Something like that," she murmured, turning back to her task. Leo didn't press. No one ever did. But her solitude was soon interrupted by Brittany, a hostess whose ambition was as sharp as her tongue. "You know, Elara," she began, twirling a strand of perfectly curled hair. "You really should try smiling. You're killing the ambience. Nobody wants a miserable waitress serving their $1,000 steak." Elara placed the pitcher down. "I'm here to work, Brittany, not to entertain." Brittany smirked. "Well, maybe if you put in a little effort, you wouldn't look like you just wanted out of a homeless shelter." A nearby couple snickered. Elara's hand tightened on the pitcher, a flicker of immense strain, before she turned and walked away. The night was reaching a crescendo of clinking glasses and forced laughter when the grand entrance doors exploded inward. 3 men in black ski masks stormed in, their heavy boots thudding against the marble, their guns held high. "Everybody down. Now!" The leader roared, his voice a gravelly bark. The room imploded. Crystal shattered as financiers and socialites scrambled under tables, their couture gowns and bespoke suits dragging through puddles of spilled wine. Julian Croft yanked Isabel to the floor, his expensive watch catching on the tablecloth and tearing it. Chad was already on his knees, babbling, "Take anything you want, just don't hurt us." Tiffany's sobs were hysterical, mascara tracing black rivers down her cheeks. Alexander Thorne, the billionaire, went pale, his hands moving to strip off his watch and ring in a gesture of surrender. Elara stood in the dead center of the room, still holding her tray of empty glasses. She didn't drop it. She didn't scream. Her eyes methodically scanned the intruders, 1, 2, 3, as if she were calculating tactical positions. The leader, a burly man with a jagged scar bisecting his eyebrow, fixated on her. He stomped toward her, leveling his gun at her chest. "What's wrong with you?" "I said get on the floor." The other 2 robbers fanned out, their voices sharp as they demanded wallets and jewelry. From under a nearby table, a woman clutching a string of pearls whispered, "She's insane. Why is she just standing there?" The gun barrel was now inches from Elara's forehead. "Are you deaf?" "Kneel." Hidden beneath his table, Julian Croft hissed, his voice trembling but still laced with contempt. "Don't be an idiot. He's gonna shoot you." Isabel, her face a mask of terror, screeched, "You're gonna get us all killed." "Don't drag us down with you, you moron." Chad added from the floor. They didn't want her to be a hero. They wanted her to be broken, to affirm their judgment of her as small and insignificant. But Elara Kane did not break. She exhaled a slow, controlled breath, her gaze locked on the leader's eyes. In a single, fluid motion, she shifted her weight, a subtle pivot that took her just out of the direct line of fire. Before he could process the movement, she seized his wrist, twisting it with brutal efficiency. The gun clattered to the floor. Her elbow snapped down, a sharp, decisive blow to his jaw, and he collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. She calmly placed her tray on a nearby table, her movements as graceful as if she were clearing dessert plates. A collective gasp swept through the restaurant. The other two robbers froze, their confidence shattering like the glass at their feet. In that heart-stopping moment, a young waiter named Sam, who had always offered Elara a kind word, crawled partially out from his hiding spot. "Elara, stop," he pleaded, his voice cracking with fear. "You're making it worse. Just get down, please. You're not a cop." The guests murmured in agreement. "He's right." A man in a tuxedo whispered, "She's out of control." A memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the chaos. A dusty street in a war-torn country, the air thick with the smell of diesel and fear. She was 20, her rifle familiar weight against her shoulder. A child with a gap-toothed grin had run towards her. She tossed him a piece of candy. A brief moment of humanity before her sergeant's voice had pulled her back to the grim reality. The restaurant wasn't a battlefield, but her instincts, honed in fire and blood, had taken over. The second robber, a wiry man with frantic eyes, broke from his stupor. He lunged at her, screaming, "You think you're a hero, bitch?" The guests turned on her. "She's gonna get us all killed." Isabel shrieked, "Stand down, Elara." Martin, the manager, yelled, his face crimson with panic. Elara didn't even glance at them. She ducked under the robber's clumsy swing, spun, and drove the heel of her foot into his midsection. He crashed backward through a glass-topped table, the sound of it shattering echoing through the silent room. The third robber was smarter. He was cautious. He drew a long, wicked-looking knife and circled her, his movement slow and deliberate. "You're dead," he growled, lunging low. Elara sidestepped, her motion impossibly fluid. She caught his arm, twisted, and the knife was suddenly in her hand. Using his own momentum against him, she slammed him face first into the marble floor. It was over in 15 seconds. 3 armed men lay groaning or unconscious. Elara stood over them, the knife held loosely in her hand, her breathing even. The police swarmed in minutes later. As they cuffed the subdued robbers, the guests began to emerge, their whispers of venomous tide. "She's dangerous," one man said. "Normal people can't fight like that." "She must have been working with them," his wife added, the absurd accusation finding fertile ground in their fear and confusion. Martin stormed up to Elara, his face contorted with fury. "What the hell was that? What have you been hiding? You're fired, Elara. Get out." A few of the guests, including Julian Croft, smirked with satisfaction. Elara didn't argue. She simply turned to walk away, her silence a more powerful statement than any shout. It was then that Alexander Thorne spoke. He had been a silent observer, his eyes missing nothing. He stood, brushed off his immaculate suit, and walked directly to Elara, his presence commanding the attention of the entire room. He stopped in front of her. "I don't see a waitress," he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner. "I see the only person in this room who held their nerve." He extended his hand. "My name is Alexander Thorne. From this moment on, you are the new head of security for my entire corporation." The room erupted in stunned murmurs. Julian Croft's jaw went slack. Isabel dropped her wine glass. A young busboy who had been hiding behind the bar stepped forward, trembling. "I saw what you did," he said to Elara, his voice filled with awe. "You saved us. All of us." Elara met his gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of warmth softened her expression. "Just doing what was necessary," she said. The next morning, the story was a firestorm. Billionaire hires Waitress as security chief after foiled robbery. Leaked security footage went viral. Elara's calm, precise takedown was replayed on a loop, a stark contrast to the cowering, chaotic crowd around her. The consequences were swift and brutal. Julian Croft's hedge fund hemorrhaged clients after a post exposing his Bordeaux. Sneers circulated online. Isabel's charity gala lost its primary sponsor. Chad Sterling's crypto startup saw its funding evaporate overnight. Tiffany deleted her social media accounts. Their world of privilege, built on a foundation of perceived superiority, crumbled under the weight of their own hypocrisy. A week later, Elara Kane walked into a boardroom at Thorne Industries. The executives fell silent. One of them, a man who had laughed at Tiffany's cruel joke that night, rushed to pull out her chair, his hand shaking. "Ms. Kane," he said, his voice slick with newfound respect. "We're honored to have you." Elara took her seat. On her new, expansive desk, the only personal item was a small, elegant frame. Inside was the creased photo of a young woman in combat fatigues, surrounded by her brothers in arms. She didn't have to explain it. She didn't have to say a word. Her silence was no longer a sign of meekness. It was power. She had once walked away from a life of medals and missions, seeking anonymity in the quiet corners of the world. But that night, in a fortress of wealth and arrogance, she learned that you can't escape who you are. Standing at the window of her new office, looking out at the sprawling city below, Elara didn't feel like a victor. She simply felt like herself, steady, prepared, and finally seen.